Funny how life has a special talent for flipping the script when you least expect it, especially in front of those who wear arrogance like a medal. That morning, the courtroom felt more like a poorly rehearsed play. On one side, Pamela, a young attorney from a humble background, eyes alert, gestures restrained, and a worn briefcase in her hands, worn not from neglect, but from countless sleepless nights and the weight of books she had carried on her back. On the other, Judge Annie, proud, self-assured, used to being feared and never challenged. Their meeting wasn't in the case file, but it was written in the fate of those who believe in the power of stories yet to be told. Pamela walked in silently, but fully present. No designer clothes, no flawless makeup. She didn't speak loudly, but she spoke with clarity. Her resume, though lacking flashy awards, carried more than just degrees. It bore sacrifice, silent battles, and the courage of someone who's never had shortcuts. Judge Annie looked at her with barely concealed contempt, the kind you learn to mask with formality. "Be brief, counsel," she said, as if expecting nothing more than a verbal stumble. But what came next not only silenced the room, it changed the course of that hearing. Because when Pamela began to speak, she didn't recite codes like a robot. She dissected the law with such clean, well-grounded, and crystal-clear confidence that even the clerks paused what they were doing. Her argument was a seamless thread connecting legal texts, jurisprudence, and the reality of those who suffer injustice every day. She didn't speak only as a lawyer. She spoke as a woman, a daughter, a survivor. She spoke as someone who knew that courtroom wasn't just a physical space. It was a field where, too often, justice becomes a hostage of status, and she wouldn't allow that. Annie, annoyed by the boldness of the young woman who refused to bow to her authoritarian tone, tried to interrupt, tried to undermine her sources, her citations, her argument. But Pamela, with elegance and precision, calmly and firmly refuted every remark. There were no raised voices, no insults, just consistency. And that hurt more than any insult ever could, because those who lean on their position rather than preparation tremble before someone who stands on their own merit. And in that room, everyone witnessed something rare, the silent turning point of a story that until then seemed written by someone else's hand. That's when one of the appellate judges present, merely observing the hearing for academic purposes, stepped forward and asked to have Pamela's performance formally praised in the record. He said that in his years of experience he had rarely seen such a well-constructed defense. Annie was left speechless, and not out of politeness, but because she didn't know how to respond. At that moment, the symbolic power of her robe was overshadowed by the genuine brilliance of Pamela's competence. That wasn't part of her plan, but it was Justice's plan all along. And the most curious part? Pamela didn't celebrate. She didn't smirk, roll her eyes, or throw her victory in anyone's face. She simply said thank you, with the same humility she had walked in with, because those who know the weight of a door that rarely opens for people like them understand that every step inside is a victory. There's nothing left to prove. Her story speaks for itself. Days later, the hearing's ripple effect reached jurists' groups, academic circles, and social media profiles. Pamela became a reference in law schools. But to her, none of it was about vanity. It was merely the result of a life devoted to making the law accessible to everyone, not just those with long surnames or family fortunes to fund their dreams. Her mission was clear: to make justice less elitist and more just. And her weapon wasn't fiery rhetoric. It was razor-sharp knowledge. Judge Annie, on the other hand, had to face the consequences. She had to confront her own prejudice, not because of public criticism, but due to the personal discomfort of having underestimated someone based on what she saw, not what she heard. The truth is, she came face to face with a new generation of legal minds who don't ask permission to take up space. They occupy it, with preparation, ethics, and courage. And that's unsettling for those who are used to commanding more than listening. This story, though real, could belong in textbooks, but it doesn't. Because textbooks still tend to prioritize the same old names, paths, and privileges. But that's changing, because as long as there are Pamelas in this country, and there are many, silent, persisting between life's lines, justice will continue being written in blood, sweat, and dreams. And each hearing like this adds a new chapter to this shift in narrative. Now tell me honestly, how many times have you judged someone based on their appearance? How often have you refused to listen because you'd already decided what that person represented? How many stories have you ignored simply because they didn't come stamped with authority? The courtroom where Pamela was finally heard may be far from your reality, but the prejudice she faced is common, on any street corner, in any office, at any school. And what changes everything is the courage of those who refuse to follow the imposed script. If you were Pamela, would you have had the courage to speak up even when being belittled? And if you were Judge Annie, would you have the humility to admit your mistake? Because at the end of the day, we've all played one of those roles. And the real question is, are you building a story worth remembering, or just following a script designed to keep everything exactly as it is? If this reflection moved you in any way, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now. Turn on notifications. Because here, every video doesn't just deliver content, it delivers stories that provoke, awaken, and transform. Because deep down, the justice we seek begins with how we choose to see others. The courtroom was packed, but only one stare weighed more than all the others combined. Judge Annie's. She had that kind of presence that entered before she did. Impeccable posture, a pressed robe, and a voice sharp as a blade. And it was with that very tone she addressed the young attorney who had barely stepped through the door. Pamela, with her simple folder and modest clothing, was met with a contemptuous glance and a cutting remark. For many, that would have been the end. But for those who've been judged before even opening their mouth, the game is different. Prejudice wears many faces, but the cruelest one is hidden behind power. Annie didn't even bother to listen to Pamela. She interrupted, mocked, and suggested, with irony masked as authority, that the young woman was out of place. And this happens far beyond courtrooms. How many times has someone been underestimated for speaking differently? For coming from a poor neighborhood? For not flaunting degrees on the wall but carrying stories in their eyes? That's right. Some people mistake simplicity for incompetence, and they pay dearly for it. What's most curious is that in places like this, those who judge the most are the ones who listen the least. Pamela, in that moment, could have stayed silent. But those who carry real stories know that pain can also become argument, and that's where the silent power of the once invisible lies. No one expects their answer. Little did they know that courtroom was about to become the stage for a remarkable turning point. What seemed like just another session would mark the beginning of something far greater. While the courtroom still echoed with Judge Annie's disdain, there was something no one there knew, and it would change everything. Pamela wasn't just a modest-looking young woman. She had studied at Harvard on a full scholarship. Yes, that Harvard, the one many wear like a gold medal on their resume. She wielded like a sword. And she didn't stop there. She published articles in international legal journals and had even consulted for Supreme Court justices. All of it without fanfare, without needing to shout her qualifications. Because those who know their worth don't need to prove anything to anyone, until someone tries to diminish them. But there's something people often overlook. The silent path of those who build a career rooted in excellence and discretion. Pamela faced prejudice from the hallways of law school to the offices of major firms. She slept in libraries, worked 2 jobs while studying, and still managed to deliver theses that became academic references. And as strange as it sounds, that is still seen as an exception, when in fact it reflects thousands of other stories that never make it to the spotlight because they weren't born with influential last names. And here's a detail many forget. True talent doesn't make noise. It acts quietly and emerges when it matters most. Pamela carried that entire arsenal within her. She didn't need gold pins or pompous language to be respected. What she brought was far more valuable: preparation, awareness, and courage. And what came after that revelation? Well, that's the kind of twist that teaches more than any constitutional law class. The moment everyone had been waiting for, or rather no one expected, arrived with the subtlety only the great possess. When Pamela asked to speak, some in the room smirked. Others whispered. Judge Annie adjusted her robe, ready to interrupt. But it only took 3 minutes for everything to change. Pamela began to calmly dismantle every point made by the prosecution. No stumbles, no hesitation. It was like watching a legal symphony. Each argument, a beat, each citation, a precise note. Total silence. The audience, once disinterested, now listened with reverence. It's in moments like these that we understand. Applied knowledge is worth more than 1,000 framed diplomas. Pamela showed absolute mastery of the case, cited precedents with surgical precision, and made connections that even seasoned attorneys hadn't considered. This wasn't just technical skill, it was lived experience, truth, pulsing in the form of argument. And for those who think eloquence is something you're born into, Here's living proof that studying transforms lives. And it transforms even more when it's born from a desire to change stories, not just resumes. The reaction was nearly cinematic. One of the judge's clerks dropped his pen. A prosecutor shook his head, visibly out of comebacks. And for the first time, Judge Annie was speechless. Literally. Pamela didn't just turn the tables, she changed the scoreboard. But what came next on the technical front would completely redefine the course of that hearing. Anyone familiar with legal strategy knows. Mastering the basics is one thing, diving deep into the nuances of the law is another. And that's exactly where Pamela surprised everyone even more. When she referenced a rare case law, used only in extremely complex matters, from a European court, eyes met in disbelief. No one expected a move of that caliber. What started as a defense became an unassailable counterattack. That citation dismantled piece by piece the very opinion issued by Judge Annie. It was like watching a castle collapse, one that had been built by the wrong hands. Pamela wasn't just defending her point. She was teaching. She used foreign doctrine, connected it to constitutional principles, and respectfully exposed glaring flaws in how the case had been handled. It was as if she were saying without arrogance, if this were only about power, I would lose. But here what matters is knowing what you're doing. And that hit everyone hard, because deep down, even those who were just there to watch left with a lesson. A lesson you don't learn from books, but from the stories of those who've lived every comma of the law. You know that moment when everything stops? Even the air seems to stand still? That's how it was. Pamela finished her argument and sat down with serenity. The entire courtroom was enveloped in heavy silence, the kind that only appears when someone breaks a structure that once seemed unshakable. And there was still more to come, because when the system tries to ignore someone who's ready, the ripple effect tends to reach far beyond the courthouse walls. Judge Annie, so used to commanding the courtroom with an iron fist and cutting remarks, now looked like someone else. She tried to maintain her posture, yes, my back straight, eyes firm, but anyone who knows the signs could tell she was shaken. For the first time, someone she had dismissed forced her, right then and there in front of everyone, to admit a mistake. And not just any mistake, a grave legal error, laid bare by someone she considered inferior. By the end of the hearing, with no other choice, she was forced to state on record. The defense presented solid arguments, acknowledged by this judge. And just like that, the world heard it. That kind of recognition isn't asked for, it's earned. And Pamela didn't raise her voice or respond in the same tone. Her greatest weapon was consistency, something that, in fact, should be the foundation of any career. While many seek shortcuts to gain prestige, she built her name brick by brick, stacking effort, resilience, and an unshakable will to change stories like hers. This wasn't just a technical victory, it was a shift in paradigm, a reminder that respect isn't bought with a last name, it's earned through results. Behind the scenes, the buzz was immediate. Lawyers whispered, clerks exchanged glances, and even legal journalists started making calls. Who is this girl? They asked. Pamela was no longer an unknown young woman. She was now the most talked-about name in the courthouse, and she had no idea the spotlight was just starting to shine. Behind every great mind, there's almost always someone who taught them how to think. And in Pamela's case, that person was none other than retired Judge Helena Vasquez, a name that commands respect on its own. Helena was known for her unwavering integrity and for transforming overlooked young talents into legal giants. Years ago, she saw in Pamela a spark the world insisted on ignoring. She took her under her wing, opened doors, corrected her work with the severity of someone who truly believes, and taught her that more important than winning cases is defending human stories with dignity. That bond between them wasn't public. Pamela never used her mentor's name as a shield. She preferred to build her own road, even when it was full of obstacles. But those in the know understood. Every argument she made carried the weight of someone molded by one of the country's greatest judges. Helena always said, "Justice begins in the eyes of those who listen." And Pamela learned that better than anyone. In fact, she dedicated part of her time to mentoring underprivileged law students, just as she once was. And this is where the major turning point becomes more than a personal victory. It becomes a collective example. Pamela wasn't just standing for herself. She was standing for all the stories that had been ignored for not wearing high heels, expensive suits, or aristocratic names. She represented every young person who's ever been told, "This place isn't for you." and the world was slowly beginning to realize it. It was only a matter of hours. Someone had secretly recorded the hearing, and when the footage hit the internet, it did what the internet does best. It went viral. The clip where Pamela silences the judge with a foreign precedent became a trending topic. Influencers commented, legal pages reposted, and even law professors shared the scene as a model of rhetoric, technique, and elegance. The caption, "The lawyer who silenced the judge." But those who truly understood knew this wasn't just a rebuttal. It was justice. It was the echo of countless stories that had never been heard. Then the invitations started coming. Lectures at universities, interviews with major media outlets, honors at legal events. Pamela, used to working behind the scenes, was now center stage. But she kept her feet on the ground, using her visibility to open doors for others. She launched a project to mentor law students from underprivileged backgrounds, created free educational videos, and continued to work on social cases with the same dedication. Because in the end, what went viral wasn't just a moment of glory. It was a powerful message. Competence doesn't wear a uniform. Meanwhile, in private judges' forums and magistrate groups, her name was the talk of the day. Some tried to discredit her, as they often do when someone from humble beginnings rises. Others, more honest, admitted, "That young woman gave a masterclass." And the question hanging in the air was, how did someone who came from below rise so high without stepping on anyone? The answer, in fact, was about to emerge in a reunion no one could have predicted. The impact of the case was so significant that the National Council of Justice itself was forced to act. Judge Annie's conduct, previously shielded by her position and influence, was now too public to ignore. A formal warning was issued, and more than that, she was required to attend a re-education program focused on ethics, empathy, and behavior in the judiciary. Ironically, something she had always believed was only necessary for rookies. But time has a curious way of balancing things out. And now the very judge who humiliated a lawyer for her humble background had to relearn the value of humility through the same stories she once disregarded. These re-education programs may not be punitive on the outside, but they are deeply uncomfortable on the inside. After all, they force those who've always been at the top to acknowledge their flaws, hear criticism, and face truths they've avoided for years. Judge Annie heard testimonies from victims of abuse of power, from lawyers humiliated over their appearance, from young black professionals underestimated in courtrooms, and among those voices, some seemed to echo Pamela's name. For the first time, she couldn't interrupt, only listen. And for someone so used to speaking without being challenged, that was the first real step toward change. And here comes the beauty of fate. It teaches. Sometimes it uses pride as the lesson itself. Annie began attending events where the central theme was humanized justice, and Pamela was often cited as an example. Just imagine the scene. Sitting in an audience, watching slides and hearing speakers praise the same young woman she once tried to erase with sarcasm. Yes, the world turns. And the biggest turn was yet to come, in the most unexpected place. Months passed. Life went on as it always does, but with new roles. Pamela, now nationally respected, was invited to serve on an academic panel evaluating candidates for a postgraduate program in constitutional law. It was another opportunity to contribute, share her journey, and uplift new stories. Until, upon receiving the list of presentations for the day, she froze for a moment. Among the names was Judge Annie, now removed from the bench and undergoing academic retraining. The setting had changed, but the tension was the same. On the day of the event, the room was packed. Professors, students, jurists. When Annie stepped up to the podium, a familiar silence filled the air, the same as months before. But this time she was the one presenting, defending ideas and, of course, being judged. Academically speaking, Pamela listened attentively, without interruption, maintaining the posture that always defined her, respect, even when the world had been cruel to her. At the end, Pamela asked firm but fair questions. No sarcasm, no revenge, just pure ethics and excellence. And that posture moved everyone in the room. The audience watched in silence, a reunion that didn't need words to be understood. Annie, visibly shaken, thanked her for the opportunity, for the chance to be heard, not judged. For the first time, she understood that justice isn't about who's on top or bottom. It's about who listens and honors the stories that cross their path. But one last lesson was still to come, and it wouldn't come from codes or theses, but from a single phrase that said it all. The room had nearly emptied when Pamela stood for her final remarks as evaluator. She could have just thanked everyone like most do, but she knew that moment was bigger than the panel, bigger than reparation. It was a chance to root a truth deep in everyone's heart. With a calm gaze, without theatrics, she said, "Justice isn't defined by a robe, but by the respect we show for other people's stories." It was as if each word settled into the room's collective memory. No applause was needed, no viral moment, just truth, deeply felt. That phrase didn't come out of nowhere. It came from everything she had lived, from sleepless nights studying, from slammed doors, from sideways glances and silences that screamed, from the day she almost gave up because they told her she didn't belong there, and also from the certainty that to change the world, you don't need arrogance, you need strength. Pamela understood that true impact is born when we turn pain into bridges, rejection into power, and contempt into justice. And maybe that's why this story echoed so widely. Because it wasn't just about a lawyer silencing a judge. It was about a woman who transformed prejudice into strength, who showed that real merit doesn't dress in status, but in purpose. And that, in the end, what sets the truly great apart from the merely important is respect. But this journey still holds something deeper, something that goes beyond recognition and straight to the root of transformation. Now tell me honestly, how many times have you judged someone before hearing their story? How many times did you let first impressions decide for you? The truth is, most of us carry quiet prejudices, disguised as opinions or experience. And the worst part? We don't even notice. But all it takes is a judgmental look, a misplaced joke, or a moment of impatience to reveal what we try to hide: fear of difference, the arrogance of superiority. And that's exactly what happened in that courtroom. Pamela walked in with firm steps but a racing heart. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She knew her simple clothes, her humble background, and her unimpressive surname were all stacked against her. But there, in front of eyes that measured her from head to toe, she chose not to lower her head. Because unlike what they thought, she had a story, and she had preparation. She had merit. All she needed was a chance to prove it. Judge Annie, on the other hand, came from a traditional legal lineage. Educated at elite institutions, always praised for her eloquence and firm rulings. But along with her excellence, she carried a dangerous trait: arrogance. When she saw Pamela in that courtroom, she didn't even bother to listen. She mocked her, interrupted, scoffed, as if the young lawyer's presence was an affront. And there, in front of everyone, she tried to disqualify not just her work, but her very existence. What Annie didn't know was that Pamela had something no robe could give: resilience. Behind that calm voice and direct gaze were sleepless nights, borrowed books, pages studied under candlelight. There was a mother who cleaned houses, a father who sold snacks in the plaza, and a whole childhood of being underestimated. Every point in her brief was a victory, every argument a brick laid with sweat. Every comma held a story of perseverance no one knew, but she didn't need to spell it out. She just had to speak, and that's what she did. When Pamela began her defense, the tone of the room shifted. Slowly, eyes lifted from phones and focused on her. The murmurs stopped. The confidence in her voice, the coherence of her facts, the clarity of her delivery, each one dismantled, little by little, the prejudice projected onto her image. Even the judge, visibly unsettled, began truly listening. It was no longer possible to pretend she was unprepared. Pamela wasn't just right. She was leagues ahead. And here comes the hardest part: admitting you were wrong. When it was all over, when the ruling was read and Pamela's victory confirmed, an awkward silence filled the room. Judge Annie, used to being applauded, had to swallow a hard lesson. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about respect, about understanding that behind every person is a story you don't know, and it may be far greater than your own. This story went viral, not just because someone recorded it from the audience, but because it resonated. It spoke to every Pamela who's ever been silenced, overlooked, or underestimated. And it spoke to everyone who, at some point, used their power to belittle someone else. Because in the end, we've all been in one of those places: humiliation or arrogance, the struggle or the privilege, the listener or the judge. Now stop and think. What if it were you? If you were in Pamela's place, would you have had the courage to stand your ground? And if you were Annie, would you have the humility to admit your mistake in public? These are uncomfortable questions, but they must be asked, because if we don't look inward with honesty, we'll keep repeating old mistakes in new stories. And here's the crucial point. This isn't just a story about law. It's a reflection on life, on how titles, positions, and diplomas are worthless if they're used to put others down, on how real power lies in lifting those around you, not stepping over them. Pamela showed us that you don't win by shouting louder. You win by being more consistent, more ethical, more prepared. What happened in that courtroom was more than a legal battle. It was a mirror, one of those that life holds up to ask, who are you when no one's clapping for you? Are you using your knowledge to uplift or to belittle? Are you using your voice to include or to exclude? Are you building bridges or digging trenches? If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something inside you, and that's a good sign. It means there's still space for change, and change begins like this, with discomfort, with a question that keeps echoing in your conscience, with a truth we try to hide, but that one day inevitably shows up. We live in a time when everyone wants to be right, but few want to listen, where image shouts louder than content. But if Pamela's story proves anything, it's that truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs space, opportunity, and above all, respect. Because the world doesn't need more harsh judges. It needs more people willing to admit when they're wrong. And in the end, that's what this story invites you to do. Reflect. Rebuild. Free yourself from snap judgments and begin to see others with more empathy. And if a courtroom can be the stage for this transformation, imagine what we can do in our daily lives. At work, at home, in traffic, at the supermarket line. So if this video made you think, hit that subscribe button now, turn on notifications and join us. Because here, every video doesn't just deliver content, it delivers awareness. And if you've stayed until now, deep down you already know. It's time to change how you see the world. It's time to write your own story, with more respect, courage, and truth.